Morning, y'all. I'm Mark. Hope y'all are doing well. It's a bit of a chilly day down here in Arkansas. When I woke up at 6 o'clock this morning, it's about 35. Wasn't quite freezing, but we're almost there. Nice fall day. I think it's only about to be 75 today, but by the end of the week, we'll be heading back into third summer and it'll be 85. So I'm enjoying the fall while I can. Today we're going to be talking about a topic that I think has been pressing on a lot of our minds. At least it has been on mine. I have been noodling with this topic for a very long time, wanting to push it off, wanting to not almost acknowledge that it's there, but I think the evidences have become too evident to ignore any longer. So today we're going to be talking about why the 8 reasons we might be marching toward war. The first reason I think we're going to war is we are funding wars while neglecting the American people. Now I have my phone here just so I get all the numbers right, but we have sent a ton of money to Israel and Ukraine in wars that we are not involved with while neglecting the American people. A giant hurricane just ripped through the U.S., Hurricane Helene and then Hurricane Milton. We're going to be mainly talking about Hurricane Helene, but it went over eastern Tennessee, western North Carolina, and just dumped. And people lost their homes. They lost everything. And what do we have for those people? Well, we are giving them $750. That way they can, replace at least a few of the items in their fridge. FEMA, which is the government organization that is supposed to help people when something catastrophic like this happens, they have said they have ran out of money. They've spent it all on migrants that have come into the U.S. illegally. We have spent $1.4 billion on migrants for free flights, free hotels, plane tickets to wherever they need, phones, a cash card. We spent all that money on them, $1.4 billion, but we only have $4 million for the people in western North Carolina, eastern Tennessee that have lost everything, their homes, everything. All of the hurricane victims from Hurricane Helene are all getting $750, except not all the people are actually getting $750. They've actually run out of that money too, so some people are only getting $300. On the same day that we announced that we were only going to give $750 to the people in the U.S. that have lost everything from the hurricane, they announced that we are sending an additional $8.7 billion to Israel. So we can send $8.7 billion to Israel to fund their war while we neglect the people in the U.S. The people in Hawaii, when they had the catastrophic wildfires, they only got $700. So I guess the people in North Carolina and eastern Tennessee are actually a little more fortunate. In total, we have sent $17.9 billion to Israel, and we have allocated $113.4 billion for Ukraine and have already sent them $60 billion. Also, when they announced that they were only going to give the American people $750, they also announced that they will be sending an additional $425 million to Ukraine. I'm going to move y'all out of the sun. There you go. It's interesting that we can send all this money to Ukraine, Israel, and yet we can't send money to our very own American people. And this is not a Democrat or a Republican issue. About 2 years ago, there was a big hurricane. I can't remember the name of it, but there was a big hurricane that ripped through a couple hours south of Tampa. And they did not get much aid for the government. Now, Florida is a Republican state, but North Carolina, which is a very purple state, has also not gotten hardly any aid. And Hawaii, which is a solid Democratic state, this is not just a administration saying, oh, we're only going to favor Democratic states, or we are only going to favor Republican states. They are just neglecting the American people overall. The second reason we're going to war are the Minsk 1 and 2 agreements. With the Minsk 1 agreements, they have come out publicly and said, we enacted the Minsk 1 agreements so we could stall and get more military forces and aid. And with the Minsk 2 agreements, they were going to come to a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine, but then Boris Johnson went over there and bada bing, bada doom. It was all undone. Now, it is very hard to find information about this. When it first happened, there was tons of information, but now that information has suddenly disappeared. But people like Armstrong from Armstrong Economics and RFK have talked about this thing exactly. And if they're going to speak in the name of peace deals and then not actually have the intentions of following through with the peace deals, that's a problem, and it just looks like they're encouraging war. The third reason I think we're going to war is the Nordstrom Pipeline. Now, a couple of years ago, Russia was putting a pipeline through to Germany. It was called the Nordstrom Pipeline, and the U.S. publicly stated that if the Nordstrom Pipeline gets put in, we are going to bomb it. Then, when the Nordstrom Pipeline was put in and it was bombed, the U.S. was like, oh, nope, that wasn't us. That wasn't us. That was Ukraine. So I just find it interesting that they publicly state they're going to bomb it, and then it does get bombed, like, oh, nope, that wasn't us. That wasn't us. So And just that right there in itself could be seen as an act of war. The fourth reason I think we might be going to war is the current presidential administration total disregard for the China One policy. The China One policy is saying that China and Taiwan are the same thing, that Taiwan does not have its independence. The U.S. has been following this for decades, but all of a sudden with the new administration, they have decided not to follow that. Several politicians have made comments about the China One policy that the State Department has had to back off. And if something happens with Taiwan, we are in a bit of a pickle. We get all of our chips from Taiwan. The new Ford F-150s take anywhere between 1,500 and 3,000 microchips just to produce that car. Everything needs a chip. You pretty much need a different microchip for your left blinker than you do your right blinker. The fifth reason I think we are going to war is the European countries are raising their draft ages. China has raised their draft age up to 60, as well as Belarus. It's very interesting that they're raising their draft ages even though we are not in a time of war. Now, I think it is interesting that we are raising our draft ages. Historically, we have not had old people fight in the wars. It has always been the young people. I think they are raising the draft ages because the younger generations are so unhealthy. 70% of males in the US between the ages of 18 and 24 do not qualify for the military standards at this time. 70% of males in between the ages of 18 and 24 cannot get into the military because they do not meet the requirements. The next reason that goes right along with the previous reason is that countries are raising their military spending when we're not in a time of war. Again, I'm going to refer to my phone because I have all the percentages. Poland is doubling the amount of troops in the armed forces. China has raised their military budget just recently by 7.2%, and their military budget has doubled over the last decade. Germany has increased their military spending by 48% since 2014. Finland has increased their military spending by 36%. Lithuania has increased their military spending by 27%, and Sweden has increased their military spending by 12%. Military spending in Central and Eastern Europe is higher now than it was at the end of the Cold War. Let that sink in. Military spending in Central and Eastern Europe is higher than it was at the end of the Cold War. You know, when we thought we were going to have a nuclear war? Yeah, it's higher now. They're raising the draft age. They are raising how much money they are spending, and yet only 9% of eligible people in the US would even consider going into the military. So of the 30% of the males that can actually go into the military, only 9% of the 30% would even consider going into the military. The US military is in a recruitment crisis. So what do? They turn to the influencers. There has been so many ads, one from the US military, promoting the US military, saying, hey, go Army, be all you can be. But then they're also paying the influencers to promote the military. Here's a couple clips that I've seen from a bunch of creators, and this isn't just like fitness influencers. They've done a bunch of those. They're also doing people who do camping, people who do cooking. Here, I'll show you a couple clips right here.
Video is sponsored by the U.S. Navy.
Get down the logs!
In this video, I'll be taking part in Anglo-Marine training.
So why remake beef stroganoff? Because the U.S. Navy, as in the U.S. Navy, the Navy, challenged me to completely remake it in a way that's never been seen before. Thank you to the U.S. Navy for sponsoring this video.
Thanks to the Navy, which is sponsoring this video, I got rare access to an actual DLI class and an instructor who is going to see if my Chinese meets the standards of the U.S. Navy.
A video that I watched, I couldn't find the video again, but there was this lady travel vlogger, and she was saying, you should join the military because number one, you get to travel, and number two, you get to experience different cultures and cuisines. And I'm like, is that the reason we're joining the military, to do new food? I don't want to get shipped over to Korea just to try new foods. I got a Panda Express down the road. That was a joke. Panda Express isn't that good. I make better Chinese food at home. So military spending is up. They are spending tons of money on advertisements and influencers. A bunch of countries are raising the draft age. We are funding wars in Ukraine and in Israel, and yet we're not in war? I find that interesting. Now, obviously, I am not the one that is pulling the strings in the government, and neither are you. So what can we do? Well, we can vote. we do happen to have a fairly big election coming up here. Now, I am not going to tell you who to vote for. You vote for who you think is going to be anti-war. You vote for who you think has the best interest for the American people and doesn't want to send the young people or maybe the old people. If you are even 45, you might not be exempt, because if 70% of the youth in this country do not qualify for the military, number one, I think that they're going to have to change the draft requirements. They're going to have to get rid of things like asthma. Oh no, if you have asthma, you can still go into the military. If you have ADHD, you can still go in the military. I think they're going to have to change that. Now, that is my speculation. That is not set in stone. But if 70% of people cannot qualify, number one, they might raise the draft age. So that means if you are 40, 45, you might not be exempt. If you have asthma, you might not be exempt. If you have ADHD, you might not be exempt. So vote for the person that you think doesn't want to send us to war. Vote for the person who you think has the people's interest at heart. And I'm not going to tell you who that is. You get to make that decision for yourself. I am not here to tell you how to vote. I am not here to tell you what decisions you should be making. I have presented you some facts. I presented you my opinion, but at the end of the day, you get to make your decision about how you run your life and how you vote. If you found this video informative in any way, shape, or form, consider subscribing and checking out the video right up here about the 5 reasons I left Washington State.